Did you know that every 65 seconds, a new brain develops Alzheimer's dementia? In United States, there are about 6.2 million Americans age 65 and older living with Alzheimer's dementia. More than 11 million Americans, most of them family caregivers, provide unpaid care for their loved ones with Alzheimer's dementia. Between 2000 and 2019, deaths from heart disease have decreased 7.3%, but deaths from Alzheimer's have increased 145%. Coronavirus pandemic actually led to surge in Alzheimer's and other dementia deaths. During this pandemic time, deaths from Alzheimer's and other dementia have increased by 16%. Alzheimer's dementia is the sixth cause of death in the United States. Is there hope? How close are we to a new treatment or cure for Alzheimer's dementia? Are there any things we can do now for our parents, for us, and for our children? Let's find out. I'm your host, Dr. Shin. Welcome to my Science Cafe. I'm very excited to introduce today's distinguished guest, Dr. Joshua Grill. Dr. Grill is an associate professor in the School of Medicine and in the School of Biological Sciences at University of California, Irvine. He is the director of UCI Institute for Memory Impairment and Neurological Disorders, or in short, UCI Mind. Welcome, Dr. Grill.
Thank you, Dr. Shin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so Alzheimer's dementia is so devastating. Let's just start from what is Alzheimer's dementia and what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's dementia?
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me. That question is certainly the question we get the most when we're speaking in the public about what we do and why what we do is so important. Dementia is what we call a syndrome. It means that a person fulfills a set of criteria. In this case, the criteria that a person has problems with their thinking skills and that those problems are significant enough that it impairs the way they live their life. So they need help living their life because of the problems that they're having with their ability to think. Alzheimer's disease is a very specific disease of the brain, and it's one in which a couple of abnormal proteins are accumulating in the brain and impairing the brain's function, and therefore thinking skills and ability to live life are impacted by the disease. And Alzheimer's disease is the single most common cause of dementia. So essentially every person with Alzheimer's disease meets the criteria for dementia, but not every person with dementia necessarily has Alzheimer's disease. And in fact, there are a handful of occurrences where a person meets the criteria for dementia, but they're suffering from a condition that can be treated or even reversed. Unfortunately, that's not typical, but there are occurrences where a person has dementia and can be adequately treated so that they no longer have dementia. And of course, that's certainly our goal in Alzheimer's disease research, is to make Alzheimer's disease a condition that causes dementia that we can treat adequately so that a person no longer has dementia, though it's not yet the case.
Thank you. UCI Mind is one of only 32 federally designated Alzheimer's disease research center in the nation. Would you give us a general overview of UCI Mind and what research is happening at the UCI Mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very proud to be one of those NIH-funded and specifically National Institute on Aging, or NIA-funded Alzheimer's disease research centers. That, as you point out, puts us in a very elite club and a highly collaborative network of centers around the country who deposit data into a single repository so that we can accelerate our pace of learning about Alzheimer's disease and other causes of dementia. We're very proud of UCI Mind beyond being an ADRC. And I think what I'm most proud of about being a part of UCI Mind is our truly transdisciplinary composition and approach to dementia research. Our faculty come from many different schools and many different departments on campus, more than 13 different departments, for example. And that includes, of course, the folks from the Department of Neurology and Psychiatry, who we all think of as diagnosing and treating people with Alzheimer's disease dementia, the Division of Geriatrics and the Department of Pathology, also in the School of Medicine, are highly involved. We have neuroscientists from the School of Biological Sciences. We have neuropsychologists and other psychologists from the School of Psychological Sciences and Cognitive Sciences. We've even had faculty from the schools of education and arts, to name just a few. And so UCI Mind was born out of the vision of some tremendous leaders on the campus of UC Irvine who preceded me, including Drs. Carl Kottman, Frank LaFurla, and Andrea Tenner. And I've just been very fortunate to inherit a wonderful organization that's dedicated to bringing people together who bring unique expertise and collaborate to answer questions that people couldn't answer on their own. And as I had mentioned, we're incredibly proud of it. And we believe that this is how we will find bigger, better solutions faster to these hugely important problems as you outlined in your introduction.
Thank you. That's amazing. So Dr. Grill, you lead the UCI Mind as the director, but at the same time, you are a neuroscientist and you conduct your own research as a faculty scientist at UCI. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself, like how you get into this field? Did you dream of being a neuroscientist, and what motivates you to become a neuroscientist, and what training you took, and what makes you interested in this Alzheimer's dementia research?
Sure. Well, I've had an incredibly fortunate career and path in neuroscience, specifically dating back to when I was a college student and began working in a neuroscience laboratory with a remarkable investigator who studied the part of the brain that's most impacted earliest in Alzheimer's disease, the hippocampus. I ended up doing training in the basic sciences before I had an incredible opportunity to retrain as a clinical researcher with one of the world's leading Alzheimer's disease scientists, Dr. Jeffrey Cummings at UCLA. And so I have a unique path in that I did basic science training and retrained as a clinical researcher. And then working with Dr. Cummings and also with one of the real leaders in our country in understanding Alzheimer's disease from an ethical standpoint, both in the clinical and the research setting, Dr. Jason Karlowich at the University of Pennsylvania, I had an opportunity to sort of grow my own career in the clinical area as it relates to clinical trials and the way we design and conduct clinical trials, especially as it relates to how we recruit participants and the efficiency and the ethics of what we're doing. So I've been incredibly lucky to work with a collection of remarkable investigators. And in 2015, I moved from UCLA with Dr. Cummings to UC Irvine and joined this remarkable and illustrious group, and have forged some collaborations that are certainly going to last the remainder of my career. And again, have let me answer some questions working with people like Dan Gillen in the Department of Statistics and the School of Information and Computer Science here at UCI that I couldn't have answered on my own. And so I'm living the vision of UCI Mind day in, day out, and it's fantastic. And again, I'm just so proud of being able to make these contributions in partnership with my colleagues.
So Dr. Grill, that's amazing. And it seems likely meeting right people, right mentor at the right time, right place, that's very important. And so as a neuroscientist in Alzheimer's dementia research, how close are we to a new treatment, meaning stopping the progression of Alzheimer's dementia or cure for Alzheimer's disease? And in your opinion, what's the biggest challenge in Alzheimer's dementia research?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure how close we are. I believe we're close. What I'm certain of is that we are immensely closer today than we've ever been before. And I think the acceleration in our rate of learning and understanding Alzheimer's disease has just been exponential over the last 2 decades, especially. And it's hard to keep up. We're learning so much so fast, not just at UCI, but worldwide. And it really is an international endeavor to find solutions for Alzheimer's disease and other causes of dementia. So I do believe we are moving rapidly toward having solutions. There's no time to waste. It's been more than 15 years since we had a new drug approved for Alzheimer's disease, and no drugs that are approved can actually slow the course of the disease at all, let alone stop or reverse it. So there's still work to do, and there's a lot of hope, a lot of optimism, a lot of promise in taking what we've learned and identifying new treatment targets, or even some of the things that are currently in the developmental pipeline that seem to have great promise. We've had some unprecedented firsts in the last couple of years with treatments that can, for example, clear the brain of the amyloid plaques that accumulate in Alzheimer's disease. And whether those treatments will be adequate to slow or stop the disease remains an open question. There is one drug that can do that that's currently under review by the US Food and Drug Administration for a potential approval. We had another drug like that release some results recently in an earlier phase study that could actually slow the cognitive and functional decline associated with Alzheimer's disease. So very exciting results. The biggest barrier to taking those exciting, promising results and getting to a stage of an approved drug that's used to try to stop Alzheimer's disease worldwide is actually participation in our studies. It is still the most consistent challenge we face in clinical research for Alzheimer's disease, and really for every area of medicine, that not enough people participate in our studies. And studies always take longer than we hope or expect. Sometimes it takes 3 times as long to recruit people into a study as the study itself is meant to take. And so a 2-year study can take 6 years. And we have to get better at this, and we're working hard to develop tools to try to do better at it. But in addition to the timeline of completing a study, the people who participate in that study rarely represent in an adequate manner the people we want to help. That is, people in clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease in the United States do not look like the people in the United States who suffer from Alzheimer's disease. We are a very diverse nation. Many races, many ethnicities, rural and urban areas, wide-ranging socioeconomic status, and people in certain groups, African Americans and Hispanics in particular, as well as some Asian populations, may be at increased risk to get Alzheimer's disease compared to whites. Yet, when you look at who participates in clinical trials, it's predominantly overwhelmingly well-educated, non-Hispanic white people. And so we have to do a better job of doing these studies more efficiently, more rapidly. That means getting more people into these studies quickly, but it also means doing a better job of making sure that the people in our studies really represent all the people who suffer from the disease, because we want to help everyone who gets this disease, not just a certain subset of the population. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has shown an important light on this topic, and we've seen some important improvements when it came to the diversity of clinical trials for COVID vaccines. And we need to run with it, and we need to make the diversity of our Alzheimer's disease clinical trials equally representative of our nation.
Thank you for mentioning that equal racial and ethnic equal representation. That's important. That's most challenging area in Alzheimer's dementia research to get a better treatment options and better prevention strategies. So there are ample and substantial evidence and reports indicating Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are one of the most underrepresented racial ethnic groups in healthcare access as well as medical research. There are several factors that contribute to that low participation rate among Asian Americans. First of all, trust. So trust is an important factor that contributes to willingness to participate in medical research among all racial ethnic groups, especially Asian Americans. Second, what we know as myself, the Asian American, the myth and fears around the clinical trials because Asian Americans thought they have to take investigational, meaning not yet approved by FDA, investigational drugs whenever they participate in medical research. Second, the lack of given opportunity for Asian Americans. Many Asian Americans actually do not aware there are research studies, wide range of research studies from simple online survey to the drug trials exist available for them, and some of them maybe they are interested in participating in. Cultural and language barrier also play a key role in this. So let me ask you, what efforts have you and UCI Mind made to tackle these issues?
Yeah, well, I think each of the points you hit on, 1 through 3, are all critically important. And we are trying to tackle each of them in turn and doing a lot. From a trust standpoint, first, we have a very diverse team here. The people who are performing the research are multicultural and multi-ethnic and multiracial. We have of course, you know, a diversity of backgrounds in our team, from clinician scientists who are medical doctors to psychologists to nurses and neuroscientists and on down. But I'm very proud of the diversity of our team. So when a person comes to participate in a study with us, there's a good chance they'll see someone that looks like them in some role or another. And I think that's a really important part of letting people know that you're among friends and people you can trust. We take our efforts to gain and keep trust very seriously. We know that people in the community value the opportunity to learn from us. So we put a lot of effort into going out into the community to share what we're learning, share the importance of our mission and our research, and we hope give people information that they can use to make decisions in their own lives that'll help ensure their own brain health, and perhaps make a decision to partner with us as well. In my career, I found that partnering with other organizations that already are known commodities can be an excellent way to gain access into communities, to get a sort of vote of confidence from a well-known and trusted source. So we partner with a lot of community-based organizations here in Orange County, the Somang Society, the South Coast Chinese Cultural Association, various other organizations in the Asian American community that we really value as partners. And that partnership is very much a two-way street. We're taking advice from them about the types of education we should be bringing to the community. We give people input into our research questions and research design to the greatest extent possible. And then ideally, we're partnering to try to find the right people to participate in studies. We've created new tools. And one of them that we're particularly proud of here at UCI is called the Consent to Contact Registry, which is meant to sort of be a gateway, or sometimes I refer to it as a dating service for people in the community who are open-minded about research. And it's a very simple process of going online and choosing to put your information into a list of sorts so that we have your permission to let you know about a study if a study that's right for you comes along. And we ask people to tell us about the types of studies they'd be willing to do and a little bit about themselves. And again, that's so that we can make that match between them and a study. And we're not wasting people's time contacting them about studies they're not eligible for, or about studies that they're not willing to do. And so far we have more than 4,500 people who've enrolled in that registry. And we've referred 4,000 people to be in studies. So we believe that that tool is working. And we've recently translated the C2C registry into Mandarin, Vietnamese, Korean, and Spanish to try to make it more accessible to the diverse people here in Orange County. But there are other tools like that that aim statewide or even nationwide. And we're part of one project with colleagues at the University of California, San Francisco, University of California, Davis, Stanford, and several community organizations called the CARE Registry, which is aiming to create a registry of 10,000 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders expressly for the purpose of trying to increase representation of that unique population in research throughout California and beyond. As you point out, Asians are historically terribly underrepresented in our research. And we know that things like drugs could actually work differently in Asians compared to non-Asian populations. And so we really need to do a better job of increasing the representativeness of that population in our research in particular. And so the CARE Registry, which is at careregistry.ucsf.edu, is similarly a list that a person can join with confidentiality and very little risks and no obligation, so that if a study comes along that might be right for you, you are at least made aware of it and then can choose to participate or not. And then lastly, we even have national registries now. And I'm a part of one called the APT Web Study, which is at aptwebstudy.org. And the unique thing about the APT Web Study is it's national, it's already diverse, but it involves quarterly memory testing, and people can enroll and use it as an option to track how they're doing with memory performance, and that's unique. And all of these things are voluntary. You can change your mind at any time, and you can be in all of them. If you happen to live in Orange County and you want to be in C2C, so that if there's a study at UCI for you, great. If you happen to be Asian, you can also enroll in the CARE registry so that people can contact you about studies that are really focused on Asian Americans. And if you're worried about your memory, you can join APT as well, and engage in those quarterly memory testings and try to get a sense of how you're doing over time. And you can be in all of these, and all of them share the attributes of being voluntary, free, confidential, and you can change your mind at any time.
Wow, what a wonderful, wonderful studies. So let me clarify a couple of things. First of all, I actually appreciate you and UCI Mind and other scientists who really dedicated their efforts to increase equal representation by including Asian American and Pacific Islander community into the research. Because as you mentioned, maybe the drug works for other ethnic racial groups, may not work for us. Or maybe the dose may not work for some group, not work for Asian Americans.
Right.
So that's really important. And I really appreciate you really listen what's the problem and what's the challenges from the community and build the trust by working with community organizations who already built a trust within the communities.
Absolutely. And
And
the only thing worse than a drug not working in Asians and us not knowing that would be if a drug did work in Asians but didn't work in other people and we didn't know that. And it's very possible that Alzheimer's disease will end up having many, many treatments that work differently in different people. And only if we have a lot of different types of people in these studies will we know that and identify when a drug works in a subpopulation of people so that we can determine if it should be approved in a unique group. And that may be Asian Americans, it may be some other way we define people, but only when we have a diversity of people participating in our studies will we actually know that. And I should reiterate a great point you made before. These registries are not built just to help clinical trials of new medications. We use the registries to do surveys of people, to do telephone interviews of people, to enroll people into longitudinal observational studies that involve memory testing or brain scans, and everything in between. So you don't have to be willing to be in a clinical trial to enroll in the registry and still make a huge difference in the research fight to find solutions for these diseases.
thank you. Yeah, and I'm amazed because UCI Mind Registry, Consent to Contact, which is C2C registry, translated into multiple languages that truly considers language and cultural barriers Asian Americans and other ethnic racial groups facing. So
Yeah.
myself, and I'm sure our community appreciate your efforts as well as Care Registry too, because Care Registry is also translated in multiple languages.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you for all your effort. And regarding the ATP web study, you mentioned that's the free memory testing quarterly, confidentially, and through the online virtual setting. So I think that's very important information to the community. As we know, as we age, we forget things. And many seniors worry about becoming forgetful. But age-related forgetfulness is very tricky because not all memory problems mean a sign of Alzheimer's dementia.
Right.
So what is the difference between normal aging-related forgetfulness and a serious memory problems?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's really important. You know, traditionally, the way we answer this question is that if you or your loved one is repeating the same question in a single conversation or struggling to do things that were once very easy, like finding your way to the neighborhood grocery store, etc., that's not normal memory change. But if you can't remember where you put your keys, or you need to make a list before you go to that grocery store where you used to do it all by memory, that may be perfectly normal. The body ages, the brain ages as well. And we understand that the brain changes with age. What's getting trickier is that so much of our work in Alzheimer's disease has been about understanding the very first signs of the disease. And the more we aim to understand when the disease begins, the earlier and earlier we're moving. And the disease is very slow in its onset. It's very progressive. We sometimes refer to it as being insidious because it's difficult to say when it actually began. And so while it's easy to say when a change is abnormal and should spark, medical attention, if you have a loved one who's asking the same question over and over again in a single conversation, that's a warning sign that something may be affecting their memory. It might be one of those things that we can treat. It might be Alzheimer's disease. So you want to seek a diagnosis from an expert clinician who can help you understand that. someday we're going to make the diagnosis much, much earlier than that, because we'll hope to identify people who are appropriate for therapy, start a therapy so that they never reach that point. And that's where the research is really leading us. And it's clear that the disease does begin with extremely subtle changes. And they may be in memory performance, but only things that we can pick up with very sensitive tests, or even things that we can't pick up with some of our sensitive tests, but that the individual recognizes as a change from the way they once were. And then ultimately, we believe that we'll use the biological changes in the brain to diagnose people even before the memory problems begin. And so much of our work now is around how can we use biological tests to identify people before they experience memory, language, or decision-making problems. And we're testing drugs in people who have biological changes that put them at increased risk to develop those memory problems. And in the trials, we're testing whether we can delay or prevent the onset of those memory problems. So getting back to the original couple statements, it's a really exciting time. We're very hopeful and optimistic that we can take all we've learned, including this knowledge of how the brain changes in advance of the memory problems, and the identification of these great treatment targets, and even the development of new therapies. And now we're in the point of testing these things in clinical trials to see if we can actually change the way we diagnose and treat this disease so that people hopefully will never get dementia if they have Alzheimer's disease.
That's exciting. So Alzheimer's dementia, once person develops symptoms, that's already late. So registries, many of those registry studies in registry-associated clinical trials look for people asymptomatic, meaning not even before develop any memory problems or behavioral or kind of the memory functional changes. The scientists try to find out whether that person looks healthy and normal memory function, but had some risk to develop Alzheimer's dementia. So find out that status early and tackle the problem early.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Of course, we're still looking for better treatments for people who have Alzheimer's disease. And there are a lot of ongoing clinical trials for new therapies for people who have Alzheimer's and dementia, or mild cognitive impairment, another common diagnosis delivered in the clinic. So those studies remain vital, critical, and we're still very hopeful about finding better treatments for people who have dementia. But a lot of our studies have been aiming earlier and earlier, and this category of people who have no symptoms, they may be at increased risk if the biology says the disease has begun. And so we want to find those people who have normal memory, but a brain scan or a blood test suggests that the disease may have started. And that may be the ideal window of time to try to intervene so that they never get the memory problems. And those are the types of studies we're doing now. And whereas we used to recruit to clinical trials from the clinic when people had those memory problems, so they would need that expert diagnosis, these new studies require new methods of recruiting people, and the registries are the main way we're trying to accelerate those studies by having large collections of people who are older and have normal memory and are willing to hear about studies if they might qualify, and perhaps even enroll and be the first person to have Alzheimer's disease prevented.
Wow. So how we as the audience find these registry studies and actually enroll these registry studies, and what are the eligibility criteria and why join this? So you already mentioned like we need to join this study. There are a lot of benefits. Maybe you can summarize the benefit of participating in these registries. And the important question is, what happens if someone were to enroll in those registry studies? What happens next?
Yeah, so I'll try to be brief, but For people who live in Orange County, we don't exclude people who don't live in Orange County, but we consider our C2C registry as a local registry to support research at UC Irvine. So if you live in Orange County or Southern California and you want to support researchers at UC Irvine, then you can enroll in C2C, which is just at the website c2c.uci.edu. And you can expect to take about 20 minutes giving information online to us that will be kept confidential. And then you can sign up for newsletters and get information from us. And hopefully at some point be invited to do a study at UC Irvine. It might be an online survey, it might be a phone interview, or it might be an in-person study when those are happening more frequently post-COVID again. If you're an Asian American, especially in California, but not exclusive to California, and you want to do your part to make sure that Asians are represented in research, you should consider enrolling in the CARE registry, which is, again, in partnership with many institutions here in California. That's at careregistry.ucsf.edu. If you enroll in CARE, you can expect to spend a few minutes online telling the operators of the CARE registry about yourself. You'll get a $10 gift card for having signed up. And again, the hope is that there'll be a study that comes along for which you might be eligible. And with no obligation, you could be informed about that study and do your part to make sure that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are represented in that study. And lastly, if you're an older person, and I should say C2C and CARE, you really just have to be an adult, 18 or older. For APT web study, the focus is more on older Americans. You don't have to be older, but we're really targeting people who are 50 and older. And it's a little bit more involved. You have to give information about yourself at aptwebstudy.org, and the APT stands for Alzheimer's Prevention Trial. So APT Web Study. You give some information about yourself, but more importantly, you're asked 4 times a year to log in to your APT Web Study account and take some memory tests. And you get some information back about those tests. And if things look in line with the types of people we're looking for these eventual prevention studies, you could get contacted and, for example, referred to a place like UC Irvine to enroll in a cohort study or even in a clinical trial. And APT Web Study is truly nationwide, and the list of places that have in-person studies that are recruiting from APT is very large and spread out geographically over the whole nation. And as I said earlier, a person can do any or all of these 3 registries, and there are others. You might, if you live in Florida or New York, you might look at whether there are local registries from the Alzheimer's Center in your neighborhood. Many of our sister centers are starting their own registries. You know, my friends and colleagues in Philadelphia, for example, have a brain health registry that they operate out of the Penn Alzheimer's Disease Center. So a lot of options for people who are just open-minded. The commitment is very minimal on purpose. We really want to make it easy for people to say yes to these things, to have a good experience, to learn more about research, and then when the time comes, to give them an option of taking it to the next level by participating in an in-person study or even in a clinical trial.
That's amazing. So if someone from our community enroll in either any of those, right, C2C or CARE registry or APT web study, that just to give the permission to scientists to send the information, right? So once I register, I enroll, for example, the CARE registry. Then there is a study, I'm eligible, scientists from UCI or UC San Francisco or UC Davis contact me and saying, hey, here is a study involving blood drawing quarterly, or say blood drawing and free brain MRI testing. Then I review and say, oh, I'm interested in blood test. Oh, I'm interested in medical imaging test. Then I can sign up. So it's up to me, right? So, but it's registry giving the opportunity to receive that information.
That's exactly right. And those different studies may have their own incentives that they provide or unique aspects that are highly valuable to a person in the registry. And only because they enrolled in the registry would they be aware of that study. And again, only when people do this will we learn faster, and most importantly, we want a diverse population that really looks like our country so that we can find answers that apply to everyone.
Thank you. So earlier you mentioned there's no current cure, but researchers like you and institutions like UCI Mind really work hard to find a solution for treatment, prevention, and diagnosis. So considering finding new treatment options that can stop Alzheimer's progression or cure take time, is there anything that our audience can do now to reduce the risk of getting Alzheimer's dementia?
Right. Yeah, one of the real explosions in Alzheimer's research has been around lifestyle risk factors. And there are numerous sources that have undertaken an effort to try to sort of coalesce the information available from research today to identify the steps a person can take to lower their risk. Now, I personally don't believe that there's any recipe of things I can give to a person and tell them with certainty that they will never get Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. But I do believe that I can make a long list of recommendations to do what a person can to lower their risk. I can't say 100% certain it'll prevent dementia later in life, but there's a really large literature, a relatively solid evidence base for a number of steps that a person can take to try to maintain their brain health and lower their risk for dementia. Those risk recommendations include eating a healthy diet, and that means avoiding foods that are high in fat and cholesterol, but also getting certain foods in the diet, especially regular consumption of fish, at least once a week ideally, dark green leafy vegetables, and healthy fruits that are high in antioxidants like berries. The avoiding the high saturated fat and high cholesterol foods is important because high cholesterol, obesity in midlife, diabetes, and hypertension, high blood pressure, all increase your risk for getting cognitive problems later in life. So if you have any of those conditions, you should work really closely with your doctor to manage them carefully. If you're at risk for any of those conditions, you should do everything you can to try to not get into the diagnostic category. A healthy diet, of course, is a great step for trying to minimize those things. The other really important thing is physical exercise. And most adults in the United States don't get the recommended amount of exercise. And physical activity is great for the brain. It does a lot of really good things for the brain. It causes the brain to produce proteins called neurotrophic factors that help the brain survive and function better. It causes increased blood flow to the brain and even can cause sprouting of the blood vessels inside of the brain, a process called angiogenesis, and that's good for brain health as we age. So there are ongoing studies of whether exercise can prevent Alzheimer's disease, for example, as well as diet and some of these other risk factors. Colleagues here at UC Irvine have really educated me about the importance of sleep. And I would say one of the real explosions in our field in the last 5 years has been understanding what happens during sleep in the brain. And a new system was discovered several years ago called the glymphatic system. It's a process by which when we sleep, we actually clean our brain. And there's some physical as well as physiological changes that occur while we're sleeping. And one of the things we actually clean out of the brain when we're sleeping is the beta amyloid protein that accumulates in the plaques of the brain of someone with Alzheimer's disease. So getting a good night's sleep may actually be one really important recommendation for lowering your risk for getting Alzheimer's disease or other causes of dementia.
Wow. That's very interesting because those are that lifestyle interventions the doctors And the cancer specialists always talk to their patient as well too, right? Because we have to control our blood pressures and blood high cholesterols and diabetic risk, and manage the diabetics and obesity and weight control, sleeps and exercise. So it seems likely lifestyle intervention helps cancer patients that also helps Alzheimer's and dementia brain health.
Yeah, I mean, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. The heart's most important job is to send blood to the brain. Our brain only weighs 2% of our body weight, but it uses 20% of our blood oxygen and blood sugar. So, you know, those lifelong components really do add up over time when it comes to brain health. And so adopting these strategies as early as possible, it's never too late to start a good brain health habit, but starting them as early as possible may ultimately be important. And a lot of really fantastic work by colleagues around the country have shown that midlife risk factors matter to late life brain health. And so we should all do these things as early as possible.
Wow. So are there any active lifestyle intervention studies at UCI Mind or other partner institutions that you'd like to share with us?
So at UCI Mind, we don't have active studies devoted to lifestyle at the moment. We have some sleep studies that are underway and or soon will be, and those are very exciting. There are other studies happening around the country. Probably the most important and famous one is called the US Pointer Trial. It's sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association and led by a friend and colleague at Wake Forest University. And it's happening at least 4 different places. And I would refer people to their website for US Pointer study. But that's a multifactorial lifestyle intervention prevention trial. So they're intervening in people in a number of different ways to try to minimize lifestyle risk factors. But there are studies like that happening worldwide. And again, this has really been an explosion in science in the last several years, trying to understand lifestyle risk factors and whether we can use that information to help people stave off or prevent entirely Alzheimer's disease.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Greer. Thank you for your time. And thank you for sharing your insight in recent Alzheimer's advances and challenges with us today. Oh my God, that's tremendous information and good advice to our Asian American and Pacific Islander audience. Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
and
thank you for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. So as we mentioned earlier, the Asian Americans and Pacific Islander population is the most rapidly growing racial ethnic groups in the United States, but we are one of the most underrepresented in medical research. We can make a difference for ourselves and for our children by participating in these important research studies, as well as by changing a habit to a healthy lifestyle. Let's make that change now. And if you are interested in learning more about Alzheimer's dementia research or the studies that Dr. Green mentioned during this talk, follow Dr. Shin's Science Cafe at X Media or visit UCI Mind, www.mind.uci.edu. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you at my Science Cafe next time. Thanks.